The American Pershing tank, while often overlooked in the broader narratives of World War II armored combat, was an evolution in U.S. tank development that directly impacted the outcome of the war in Europe. This vehicle, designed late in the war, was not part of the initial U.S. tank force that faced off against German armor, but when it arrived, it proved to be a formidable adversary that the German tankers were largely unprepared for. Prior to its introduction, American forces primarily relied on tanks like the Sherman, which, although reliable, were at a disadvantage when facing German heavy tanks like the Tiger and Panther, whose thick armor and powerful guns had dominated the battlefield for much of the war. The Tiger tank, with its formidable 8A gun and nearly impenetrable armor, was seen by German tankers as the pinnacle of armored warfare. It had the ability to destroy Allied tanks at great distances, and its thick armor made it a near-invincible fortress on the battlefield. In the mind of the average German tank commander, the Allies could do little to counter the firepower and protection of the Tiger. This mindset was reinforced by years of successes against less advanced Allied tanks, including the British Churchill and the American M4 Sherman. However, this perception would soon be challenged by the introduction of the Pershing. Unlike the earlier M4 Sherman, which had relied on a 75mm gun that could struggle to penetrate the thick armor of the Tiger, the Pershing was equipped with a powerful 90mm gun that was capable of engaging the German heavy tanks at long range. The 90mm gun was a significant upgrade over the 75mm, and its ability to pierce the Tiger's armor was a game changer. But what was even more crucial was the fact that German tankers have little knowledge of the new American weapon, making the Pershing an unexpected threat. The surprise factor of the Pershing was compounded by the fact that it was not initially deployed in large numbers. In the early days of its deployment in the European theater, the Pershing was a rare sight, which meant that German tankers often did not anticipate encountering such a powerful opponent. The tank's presence on the battlefield was not widely known, and its performance in combat, when it was deployed, quickly established its effectiveness. The Germans had no immediate counter to the Pershing, which created a sense of uncertainty among the German tank crews who were used to dealing with Allied tanks that posed little threat to their machines. German commanders, accustomed to facing tanks like the M4 Sherman, were initially dismissive of the Pershing, believing it to be just another American tank. This misconception was not limited to the lower ranks. Even high-ranking officers underestimated the Pershing's capabilities. The reality, however, was that the 90mm gun mounted on the Pershing could punch through the thickest armor of the Tiger, and it could do so at a range where the German tank's 8A gun would have difficulty returning fire effectively. The Pershing's armor, while not as thick as that of the Tiger, was still robust enough to provide a degree of protection from German fire, further complicating the situation for the German tankers who had grown accustomed to facing tanks with much thinner armor. The presence of the Pershing on the battlefield led to a shift in the tactical landscape of armored warfare. Prior to its introduction, German tank crews were used to the relatively straightforward tactics of engaging Allied tanks at long range, using their superior firepower to destroy enemy vehicles before they could close in. The Pershing, however, forced the German tankers to adapt quickly. The American tanks, with their ability to deliver effective fire at long distances, disrupted the German commanders' confidence in the battlefield superiority of their own heavy tanks. The tactical surprise of encountering the Pershing was a significant factor in its early successes. German tank crews, who were accustomed to the relative safety of engaging Allied tanks, with little fear of reprisal, found themselves suddenly facing a tank that could defeat them in their element. The psychological effect of this new threat cannot be underestimated. German tankers, who had previously been confident in their ability to destroy Allied armor, were suddenly forced to reconsider their tactics and reevaluate the battlefield dynamics. In the end, the Pershing's presence was one of the factors that led to the eventual decline of the German armored forces in Europe. While the Pershing did not completely turn the tide of the war, it represented a critical moment in the evolution of tank warfare. The Germans, who had dominated the battlefield for much of the conflict with their superior tanks, now had to contend with a new and capable adversary. This forced them to alter their strategies and reconsider their reliance on their heavy tanks, contributing to the broader collapse of the Nazi war machine. The American Pershing tank's 90 mm gun was a technological surprise for German tankers, who were caught off guard by its effectiveness against their feared Tigers. The arrival of the Pershing demonstrated the evolving nature of armored warfare and highlighted the importance of technological innovation on the battlefield. German tankers entered World War II with the sense of technological superiority that had been cultivated through years of strategic planning and innovative engineering. The early stages of the conflict, particularly the Blitzkrieg campaigns, showcased the effectiveness of the German tanks, especially the Panzer-Artillerie IV models, which had been optimized for rapid, coordinated attacks and breakthrough operations. This early success reinforced the belief that German tanks were among the best in the world. However, by the time the United States and the Soviet Union began deploying their own armored units, the Germans had already established a reputation for cutting-edge military technology. At the core of this technological edge was the development of the Tiger and Panther tanks, both of which represented the pinnacle of German tank design at the time. The Tiger tank, in particular, was infamous for its heavily armored hull and powerful 8.8 WWII gun, which could destroy enemy vehicles at great distances. The tank's armor was so thick that, in many cases, it could withstand hits from the Allied tanks that were commonly deployed in the early stages of the war. German tankers became accustomed to the fact that their tanks could easily overpower most of the vehicles they faced, and their confidence in this technological superiority was crucial to the effectiveness of their strategies. The Panther tank, introduced slightly later in the war, was another testament to German engineering. It was lighter and faster than the Tiger but still had formidable armor and a powerful 75 mm gun that made it highly effective against both Soviet and Allied armor. Together, the Tiger and Panther tanks dominated the battlefield, and German tank crews became accustomed to the reliability and destructive power of these vehicles. This technological edge gave them a psychological advantage, making them confident in their ability to engage and destroy Allied forces, regardless of the number of tanks they faced. However, this sense of superiority was not limited to just the tanks themselves. The German tank crews were highly trained, with a focus on coordination and tactical maneuvers that made them even more dangerous. The concept of Blitzkrieg, or lightning warfare, relied heavily on the combination of speed, surprise, and the overwhelming firepower of tanks like the Tiger. German tank commanders had the support of well-organized logistics and a military doctrine that emphasized fast, decisive engagements. This allowed them to exploit weaknesses in enemy lines and achieve breakthroughs with devastating effect. In the minds of the German tankers, the technological superiority of their tanks, combined with their superior tactics, made them almost invincible on the battlefield. They believed that, with the right conditions, their tanks could defeat any opponent. The German High Command invested heavily in tank development and continuously sought to improve the design of their armored vehicles. They developed heavier and more powerful tanks, including the Tiger II's King Tiger, in an attempt to ensure that they would maintain their technological advantage as the war progressed. Yet, as the war dragged on and the Allies adapted to the German threat, the technological edge of the German tanks became increasingly challenged. The Allies, particularly the Americans and the British, began to develop their own tanks with increasing effectiveness. The M4 Sherman, despite its lower armor and firepower compared to the Tiger, was mass-produced in large numbers, allowing the Allies to overwhelm German tank units with sheer numbers. Meanwhile, the Soviets introduced the T-34, which was less technologically advanced than the German tanks, but was built in large quantities and could be produced quickly. As the tide of the war began to turn against Germany, the technological advantage once enjoyed by German tankers started to diminish. Despite their superior tanks, the Germans found themselves facing a growing number of Allied vehicles that could match or exceed the capabilities of their own machines. However, it wasn't just the number of tanks that posed a problem, but the development of new technologies and tactics that began to nullify the advantages once held by the Germans. The arrival of the American Pershing tank in the European theater in 1945 was one such development that caught the Germans off guard. German tankers, so accustomed to the power of the Tiger and Panther, did not anticipate that a new American tank would be equipped with a gun capable of killing their most feared heavy tanks. The Pershing's 90 mm gun was a significant technological advancement that would prove to be a game-changer, challenging the German tankers' long-held belief in their technological superiority. The arrival of this new tank marked a shift in the balance of armored warfare in Europe, and the German tankers were left scrambling to adapt to the new threat. By the time the Pershing was introduced, the German military was already struggling with supply shortages, mechanical issues, and an increasingly desperate defense on multiple fronts. The once legendary tanks of the German army, such as the Tiger and Panther, were no longer the unassailable juggernauts they once were. They were frequently bogged down by mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and the overwhelming numbers of Allied tanks. Despite this, the psychological impact of facing a tank like the Pershing, one that could penetrate the thick armor of the Tiger, demonstrated that technological superiority could no longer be relied upon to secure victory. The Pershing tank's emergence marked the end of the era in which German tankers could assume their technological superiority was an unbreakable advantage. With the arrival of more advanced Allied tanks and more effective tactics, the balance of power shifted away from the Germans. The Pershing, with its 90 mm gun and relatively robust armor, helped to demonstrate that technological advancements were not solely the domain of the Germans. The Allies, through innovation and adaptation, were able to challenge and eventually overcome the once dominant German tanks on the battlefield. In conclusion, the technological advantage once held by German tankers in World War II was a defining feature of their early successes in the war. However, as the conflict progressed, new technologies, such as the American Pershing, emerged to challenge this dominance. The introduction of the Pershing's 90 mm gun forced German tankers to confront the reality that their once unassailable technological superiority was no longer guaranteed. And this shift in the balance of armored warfare was one of the factors that contributed to the ultimate defeat of Nazi Germany. The German Tiger tank, often regarded as one of the most formidable tanks of World War II, was a true symbol of the German military's engineering prowess. Introduced in 1942, the Tiger tank was designed with a focus on both firepower and protection, making it a terrifying presence on the battlefield. German tankers, as well as their enemies, quickly realized that the Tiger represented a significant leap in tank design, and its reputation as a nearly invincible war machine spread across Europe. At the heart of the Tiger tank's effectiveness was its 88 mm gun, a weapon that became legendary for its ability to destroy enemy tanks at long distances. The 88 mm gun had originally been developed as an anti-aircraft weapon, but its versatility quickly made it a highly effective anti-tank gun. With the ability to penetrate the thick armor of Allied tanks, including the M4 Sherman and the Soviet T-34, the Tiger's gun was a key factor in its battlefield success. The gun could destroy enemy vehicles from over a mile away, making it a long-range threat that kept enemy tank crews at bay. But the Tiger's firepower was only part of the equation. Its thick armor was another reason why the tank was feared. The Tiger's frontal armor was up to 100 mm thick, which was far thicker than most Allied tanks at the time. This made the Tiger highly resistant to direct hits from most Allied tank guns. Even the powerful 75 mm guns mounted on American and British tanks had difficulty penetrating the Tiger's armor at normal combat ranges. This combination of heavy firepower and thick armor made the Tiger an almost indestructible opponent, particularly in the early years of the war. The Tiger's design also incorporated several other innovations that contributed to its effectiveness. The tank's suspension system was designed to support the heavy weight of the vehicle, which weighed around 55 tons. This allowed the Tiger to maintain a relatively stable platform for firing its gun, even in rough terrain. The tank also had a powerful engine which, despite its large size and weight, allowed the Tiger to move at speeds of up to 24 miles per hour on flat ground. While this was slower than some of the more nimble Allied tanks, the Tiger's firepower and armor made up for its lack of speed. German tank crews quickly became accustomed to the advantages offered by the Tiger. In battle, they would often engage enemy tanks at long range, using the superior firepower of the 88 WWII gun to destroy targets before the enemy could retaliate. The thick armor of the Tiger allowed it to close the distance with relative safety, giving German tankers the confidence to engage enemy forces head-on. The presence of a Tiger tank on the battlefield often meant that the Allies would have to adjust their tactics, either by attempting to outmaneuver the tank or by relying on superior numbers to overwhelm it. Despite its advantages, the Tiger tank was not without its weaknesses. The vehicle's heavy weight, while contributing to its armor protection, also made it less mobile than other tanks. The Tiger's relatively slow speed and limited maneuverability in certain terrains meant that it was not as effective in fast-moving engagements or in areas with rough, muddy ground. The tank's fuel consumption was also a significant problem, as the Tiger was notorious for being difficult to supply in the field. As the war progressed, these logistical challenges, combined with the increasing numbers of Allied tanks and air power, began to limit the effectiveness of the Tiger. Another problem with the Tiger tank was its complexity. The tank's advanced engineering, while impressive, made it difficult and time-consuming to maintain. Spare parts were in short supply as the war dragged on, and the Tiger's mechanical reliability became an issue. While the tank's thick armor and powerful gun made it a formidable opponent, its mechanical issues and logistical challenges gradually began to take a toll on its effectiveness in combat. Despite these problems, the Tiger remained a fearsome and highly respected opponent until the end of the war. German tankers, who had grown accustomed to the overwhelming power of the Tiger, were confident in their ability to defeat Allied forces. They had learned to rely on the Tiger's strengths, its armor and firepower, while exploiting the weaknesses of the enemy. However, the emergence of new Allied tanks, such as the American Pershing and the Soviet JS-2, would soon challenge the dominance of the Tiger. These new tanks, equipped with larger guns and improved armor, were capable of engaging the Tiger on more equal terms, and in some cases, they could even penetrate the Tiger's armor. The introduction of the Pershing tank, with its 90 mm gun, marked the beginning of the end for the Tiger's supremacy on the battlefield. In addition to its technical specifications, the psychological impact of the Tiger tank on both German and Allied forces was significant. For German tankers, the Tiger represented the pinnacle of armored warfare, and it instilled a sense of pride and confidence in those who operated it. The reputation of the Tiger tank, reinforced by its success in early campaigns like the Battle of Kursk and the invasion of Normandy, created an aura of invincibility that made it a symbol of German military might. On the other hand, for the Allied forces, the appearance of a Tiger tank on the battlefield was a terrifying prospect. Allied tank crews, who were accustomed to facing the relatively lighter German Panzer and IV tanks, found themselves at a severe disadvantage when they encountered the Tiger. The size and firepower of the Tiger often forced Allied tankers to retreat or find ways to outmaneuver it, which could be difficult in the heat of battle. The Tiger tank, with its fearsome reputation and overwhelming capabilities, became a symbol of German tank warfare, and it was a constant challenge for the Allies to overcome. In conclusion, the Tiger tank was a fearsome opponent that combined powerful weaponry with heavy armor to become one of the most formidable tanks of World War II. Its 88 mm gun could destroy most Allied tanks, and its thick armor made it nearly invulnerable to most forms of attack. While the Tiger had its weaknesses, such as its mobility and mechanical reliability, its psychological impact on both German and Allied forces was immense. The Tiger represented the peak of German tank development during the war, and it was a symbol of the technological superiority that the Germans believed they held over their enemies. However, as the war progressed, the introduction of new Allied tanks, such as the American Pershing, would begin to challenge the Tiger's dominance, marking the beginning of a shift in the balance of power on the battlefield. The American M26 Pershing tank, deployed late in World War II, was not only a significant technological advancement, but also a major surprise to German forces who had come to rely on their own tanks' superiority on the battlefield. While the Pershing was introduced toward the end of the war, its presence in combat marked a shift in the dynamics of armored warfare, particularly for the German tankers, who had become accustomed to the dominant position of their own heavy tanks, such as the Tiger and Panther. One of the key factors that made the Pershing a surprise was its 90mm gun, which was capable of piercing the thick armor of the German heavy tanks, something that previous American tanks, such as the M4 Sherman, struggled to do. Prior to the introduction of the Pershing, American tank crews had to deal with the challenge of facing German tanks, particularly the Tiger and Panther, which possessed heavy armor and powerful guns. The M4 Sherman, the primary American tank of the time, was outclassed in terms of armor and firepower when compared to the German tanks. The 75mm gun on the Sherman was often ineffective against the thick armor of the Tiger and Panther tanks, and while the Sherman had numbers on its side, it still suffered heavy losses in tank-to-tank combat. The development of the Pershing tank was driven by the realization that the American forces needed a tank that could match or exceed the capabilities of the German heavy tanks. The Pershing was equipped with a 90mm gun, a significant upgrade from the 75mm gun of the Sherman, and this weapon was a direct response to the German tank's formidable firepower. The 90mm gun was capable of penetrating the armor of the German Tiger and Panther tanks, which had previously been virtually impervious to American firepower. For the German tankers, the Pershing's 90mm gun came as a complete surprise. The German military had been accustomed to facing tanks with lesser firepower, such as the Sherman, and did not anticipate encountering a tank that could effectively engage their own heavy armor at long ranges. When the Pershing first appeared in combat, the Germans were caught off guard by its firepower and the effectiveness of its 90mm gun. In many cases, German tankers were unaware of the existence of the Pershing and its capabilities, making it all the more dangerous as an opponent. The surprise element was compounded by the fact that the Pershing was not initially deployed in large numbers. The American military introduced the Pershing in limited quantities, and it was often deployed alongside the more familiar Shermans. This meant that the German forces did not immediately recognize the threat posed by the new tank, allowing American crews to exploit this lack of awareness and gain a tactical advantage. The Pershing's introduction forced the German tank commanders to reassess their strategies and consider new tactics to deal with the unexpected American threat. The Pershing's 90mm gun was particularly effective against the German Tigers, whose thick frontal armor was considered one of their defining features. The 88mm gun on the Tiger was capable of engaging enemy targets at long ranges, but it struggled to penetrate the Pershing's armor at similar distances. In contrast, the Pershing's 90mm gun was designed to be highly effective at both long and medium ranges, making it a serious threat to the German tanks. In many cases, the Pershing's gun could disable or destroy a Tiger tank before the German crew could even get in range to return fire. The psychological impact of the Pershing's surprise appearance was significant for the German tank crews. The German military had become accustomed to a battlefield where their tanks were the dominant force, and the sudden emergence of a new, highly effective American tank forced them to reconsider their assumptions about armored combat. The Pershing's 90mm gun was not only a technological challenge, but also a psychological one, as it represented a shift in the balance of power on the battlefield. German tankers, who had been used to engaging Allied tanks with relative ease, now had to face a tank that could match or even exceed their own machines in firepower. The Pershing's surprise also affected the broader strategic picture of the war. By the time the Pershing was introduced, the Allies had already gained significant momentum in their push toward Germany. The German military, stretched thin on multiple fronts, was not prepared for the appearance of a new and powerful American tank. The presence of the Pershing, along with the effectiveness of its 90mm gun, contributed to the further erosion of German morale and their ability to mount an effective defense against the advancing Allied forces. In the broader context of armored warfare during World War II, the Pershing's 90mm gun represented a significant evolution in tank design. The gun's effectiveness against the German tanks marked the end of the era in which the German tanks were the undisputed masters of the battlefield. The German military had focused heavily on developing the best armored vehicles, and while the Tiger and Panther were incredibly powerful, the Pershing proved that the technological advantage of the Germans was not absolute. The Pershing, though introduced late in the war, was a crucial part of the Allied effort to shift the balance of power in armored warfare and to overcome the technological advantages held by the German forces. The surprise of the Pershing's appearance on the battlefield also highlighted the ongoing arms race in tank design during World War II. Both the Allies and the Axis powers continually sought to develop better and more powerful tanks to gain an edge over their opponents. The 90mm gun on the Pershing was a reflection of this ongoing arms race, as the U.S. military responded to the challenges posed by the German tanks with a weapon that could stand toe-to-toe with the best the Germans had to offer. This shift in tank design, driven by the need to counter the German heavy tanks, would have long-lasting implications for the future of armored warfare. Ultimately, the 90mm gun on the Pershing was a game-changer, and its surprise effectiveness against the German tanks represented a turning point in the conflict. For the German tankers, the appearance of the Pershing was a wake-up call that demonstrated the changing nature of the war and the growing power of the Allied forces. The Pershing's 90mm gun was not only a technological surprise but also a psychological one, as it forced the German military to confront the reality that their once dominant tanks could no longer rely on their superiority in terms of firepower and armor. The American M26 Pershing tank, although a formidable weapon capable of engaging the German Tigers and Panthers, was initially deployed in limited numbers during World War II. This limited deployment meant that the Pershing was not a common sight on the battlefield, and it was often mistaken by both Allied and Axis forces as just another variation of the M4 Sherman. Its rarity was due to several factors, including logistical challenges, production constraints, and the timing of its arrival toward the war's conclusion. Despite these limitations, the tanks that were deployed made a significant impact, as they were capable of challenging the German heavy tanks that had dominated armored warfare up to that point. The decision to produce the Pershing was made in response to the growing realization that the M4 Sherman, while reliable and numerous, was increasingly outmatched by the German Tigers and Panthers. By 1944, it was clear that a more powerful tank was needed to take on the well-armored German machines. The U.S. Army began work on the M26 Pershing, which featured a much stronger 90mm gun, upgraded armor, and improved mobility over earlier American tanks. However, despite its promise, the Pershing's entry into service was delayed by the need for extensive testing and production adjustments, leading to its introduction at a point when the Allies were already making significant gains in Europe. When the Pershing was first deployed in combat, its numbers were small compared to the thousands of Shermans already in use. The American military had to prioritize the distribution of its limited resources, and as a result, the Pershing was introduced slowly, often deployed in support roles alongside the more common Shermans. This meant that the German forces, who were already facing an increasing number of Allied tanks, did not immediately recognize the full potential of the Pershing. For German tankers, the Pershing was a rare sight, and its introduction on the battlefield came with an element of surprise. The Germans were not prepared for the appearance of a tank that could challenge their own heavy tanks. In many cases, the Pershing was deployed in smaller groups, often as part of a mixed tank force alongside other vehicles. This meant that the Germans were not necessarily facing an entire battalion of Pershings at any given time, but rather sporadic encounters with this new and powerful tank. The rarity of the Pershing meant that German tank crews did not have the time to adjust their tactics or learn how to counter it effectively. The introduction of the Pershing, despite its small numbers, forced the Germans to rethink their approach to tank battles, as they were now faced with a tank capable of penetrating the once impregnable armor of the Tiger and Panther tanks. One of the reasons for the limited deployment of the Pershing was the sheer cost and time required to produce it. Unlike the M4 Sherman, which was mass-produced in the thousands, the Pershing was a far more complex machine that required a higher level of resources to build. Additionally, the production lines for the Pershing were not as extensive as those for the Sherman, meaning that the tank could not be produced in the same quantities. The high cost of the Pershing meant that only a small number of them were available for combat at any given time. Furthermore, by the time the Pershing was ready for large-scale deployment, the war was already nearing its end, limiting the number of tanks that could be sent to the front lines. Another factor contributing to the limited deployment of the Pershing was the logistical challenges of moving these tanks across the battlefield. The Pershing was a large and heavy vehicle, weighing over 40 tons, which made it more difficult to transport and maintain than the lighter M4 Sherman. The American forces were already stretched thin in terms of logistics, and the need to supply and repair large numbers of tanks in addition to the Pershing's further complicated matters. As a result, the Pershing was not deployed as extensively as the Allies would have liked, and its impact on the overall outcome of the war was somewhat limited by its small numbers. Despite these challenges, the Pershing still made a significant impact in the limited engagements in which it participated. Its 90mm gun was capable of destroying German heavy tanks at long range, and its armor was sufficient to withstand many of the counterattacks from the German forces. In some of the key engagements where the Pershing was deployed, such as the Battle of the Bulge and the crossing of the Rhine, the Pershing's firepower and protection were crucial in breaking through German defenses and providing support to the advancing Allied forces. Even in limited numbers, the presence of the Pershing forced the German tankers to adapt to a new and unexpected threat. The rarity of the Pershing on the battlefield also had a psychological impact. For the German forces, encountering a Pershing for the first time often meant facing an unfamiliar tank that they had not been prepared to fight. The Pershing's 90mm gun, capable of knocking out a Tiger or Panther at long range, was a shock to many German tank crews who had grown accustomed to the relative ease of fighting against the more common Allied tanks. This psychological surprise gave the Pershing a tactical advantage, as it was often able to destroy German tanks before the German crews could react effectively. Despite its limited deployment, the Pershing marked a turning point in the evolution of tank warfare during World War II. Its introduction demonstrated the growing sophistication of Allied tank design and the ability to match or even surpass the capabilities of German tanks. The Pershing was one of the last great tank designs of the war, representing a culmination of lessons learned from previous tank battles and a response to the threat posed by the German heavy tanks. Although it was deployed too late to change the course of the war, the Pershing was a reminder that technological innovation could have a significant impact on the battlefield, even in the final stages of a conflict. In conclusion, the limited deployment of the M26 Pershing tank meant that it was a rare sight on the battlefield, particularly in the earlier stages of its introduction. This scarcity, combined with the surprise factor of its capabilities, made it a dangerous and unpredictable opponent for the German forces. The Pershing's 90mm gun, its robust armor, and its superior firepower played a key role in several important battles during the closing months of World War II, forcing the German tankers to rethink their strategies. While the Pershing was not available in large numbers, its presence had a lasting impact, demonstrating that even in the final stages of the war, technological advancements could still tip the balance in favor of the Allies. One of the most significant features of the M26 Pershing tank that changed the dynamics of armored warfare in the final months of World War II was its powerful 90mm gun, capable of penetrating the thick armor of the German Tiger tank. Prior to the arrival of the Pershing, the German Tiger tank had been considered nearly invulnerable to most Allied tanks. Its thick, sloped armor was designed to withstand hits from almost all enemy tank guns, and its 88mm gun could destroy most Allied vehicles at long distances. As a result, the Tiger was widely regarded as one of the most fearsome and dominant tanks on the battlefield. The American M4 Sherman, the primary tank used by U.S. forces during most of the war, was ill-equipped to handle the Tiger's thick armor. The Sherman's 75mm gun was insufficient to reliably penetrate the Tiger's front armor, forcing American tank crews to rely on flanking tactics, artillery, and air support to neutralize German tanks. Despite its numerical advantage, the U.S. Army found itself at a disadvantage when facing German heavy tanks in direct combat. While the Germans had developed some of the most formidable armored vehicles of the war, the Pershing's 90mm gun represented a shift in the balance of power. The 90mm gun mounted on the Pershing was a significant upgrade from the 75mm gun used on the Sherman. Designed with tank versus tank combat in mind, the 90mm gun was capable of delivering a powerful shell that could penetrate the thickest armor the Germans could field, including the formidable frontal armor of the Tiger tank. The effectiveness of the Pershing's 90mm gun was demonstrated in multiple engagements, where it proved capable of knocking out German heavy tanks at ranges where the Tiger's 88mm gun would have difficulty responding with effective fire. The 90mm gun was specifically chosen for its ability to engage heavily armored tanks at longer ranges. The Germans, for their part, had become accustomed to facing Allied tanks that could be destroyed from a distance with little threat of retaliation. However, the Pershing's 90mm gun was capable of reaching out to distances of 2,000 meters or more, enabling it to destroy German tanks at ranges where their 88mm guns struggled to effectively return fire. In addition, the high-velocity shells fired by the Pershing's 90mm gun allowed for greater armor penetration and more effective targeting of weak spots on the German tanks. Against the Tiger's front armor, which was up to 100 mm thick, the Pershing's 90mm gun could reliably penetrate the tank at ranges between 500 and 1,000 meters. This was a game-changing development for the Allies. In earlier encounters, the Tiger had been able to pick off American tanks at range, often without fear of retaliation. With the Pershing's 90mm gun in the mix, however, American tankers now had a weapon capable of reaching out and destroying the Tigers before the German crews could fire back. This shift in the balance of firepower represented a major strategic advantage for the U.S. Army. Beyond the direct confrontations between the Pershing and the German tanks, the ability of the Pershing's 90mm gun to penetrate the Tiger's thick armor also had psychological implications. German tank crews, who had grown accustomed to the superiority of their own heavy tanks, were taken by surprise when the Pershing appeared on the battlefield. The notion that an Allied tank could engage and destroy the mighty Tiger challenged the long-held belief in the invincibility of German armored vehicles. For many German tankers, the realization that their tanks could be destroyed at range by an American tank was a demoralizing blow. The 90mm gun's performance against the Tiger's armor was a key factor in the Pershing's effectiveness on the battlefield. Although the Pershing was still outnumbered and deployed in limited quantities, its presence made a profound difference in engagements, where German heavy tanks were a significant threat. When American tank crews encountered Tigers, the Pershing's ability to destroy them at range meant that the tactical advantage shifted away from the Germans and toward the Americans. The psychological effect of encountering a tank that could destroy their tanks before they could respond was a crucial factor in the erosion of German confidence in their armor superiority. While the Tiger was an incredibly powerful machine, it was not impervious. The combination of the Pershing's 90mm gun, superior tactics, and the evolving strategic situation in Europe contributed to the decline of the German armored forces. As the Allies pushed deeper into German-held territory, the increased effectiveness of American tanks like the Pershing contributed to the overall collapse of the German war effort. The Tiger tank, once the symbol of German armored dominance, was no longer as invincible as it had once seemed, thanks to the arrival of the Pershing. In summary, the M26 Pershing's 90mm gun was a significant technological breakthrough that allowed American tankers to engage and defeat the formidable German Tiger tanks. The gun's ability to penetrate the Tiger's thick armor, at ranges where other Allied tanks struggled, marked a turning point in armored warfare in Europe. The Pershing's 90mm gun proved to be a game changer, allowing the Allies to challenge the German tanks that had once dominated the battlefield. The psychological and tactical impact of this technological advantage played a significant role in shifting the balance of power in favor of the Allies during the final stages of World War II. When the American MM-26 Pershing tank was first introduced into the European theater, many German tank crews, who had become accustomed to facing Allied armor, underestimated the potential threat it posed. This misjudgment was largely due to the fact that the Pershing was a latecomer to the war and was not widely known or anticipated by the German military. Having faced a series of Allied tanks, primarily the M4 Sherman, the German tank crews had developed strategies and tactics that allowed them to dominate Allied forces on the battlefield. The arrival of the Pershing caught them off guard, but at first, they did not fully appreciate how the new American tank could alter the balance of power. The primary reason for this underestimation was the belief held by many German tankers that the Allies were still using the same standard tanks they had faced in the early years of the war. The M4 Sherman had been the backbone of the American armored forces throughout most of the conflict, and while it had some advantages in numbers and versatility, it was not an exceptional tank in terms of firepower or armor when compared to the heavier German models like the Tiger and Panther. The German tankers had become confident in the superiority of their own vehicles, which featured superior armor and a powerful gun, and had grown accustomed to destroying Allied tanks with little difficulty. As a result, when the Pershing first appeared, many German crews did not initially consider it to be much of a threat. They believed that the Pershing was just another variation of the Sherman, or a similar model, not realizing that it was equipped with a much more powerful 90 mm gun capable of penetrating the thick armor of the German heavy tanks. The Germans had not expected the Allies to be able to mount a tank that could challenge their own armored vehicles in direct combat, especially considering the advanced designs of the Tiger and Panther tanks, which had been a source of pride for the German military. The German underestimation of the Pershing was also due to the fact that, at first, the American tank was deployed in limited numbers. The Allies introduced the Pershing in small batches, and it was not initially a widespread presence on the battlefield. As a result, German commanders did not view it as a serious concern, believing that it was simply another American tank that they would soon be able to defeat through their established strategies. The limited deployment of the Pershing, combined with the relatively slow spread of information about its capabilities, meant that the Germans did not recognize the new tank as a serious threat until it had already engaged their forces in combat. Additionally, many German tank crews had become accustomed to fighting in a battlefield environment where they had an overwhelming technological advantage. The 80 AIM-driven gun mounted on the Tiger and Panther tanks had proven to be highly effective against almost all Allied armor, and their thick armor was capable of withstanding hits from most enemy fire. The German tanks had been able to destroy Allied vehicles from long distances, and this established a sense of invincibility among German crews. The arrival of the Pershing, with its 90 mm gun and improved armor, came as a shock because it challenged this perception of superiority. However, due to the lack of intelligence about the tank and the limited number of encounters, German crews did not immediately realize the full extent of the threat it posed. Furthermore, the German military had been under significant strain by the time the Pershing was deployed. By 1945, Germany was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and its ability to keep up with the rapid pace of technological innovation was diminishing. The Germans had suffered from supply shortages, and their tanks were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain and repair. The presence of the Pershing, though significant, was not enough to turn the tide of the war on its own, but it added to the challenges faced by the German tank crews. They had to contend not only with the superior numbers of Allied forces, but also with new technologies, such as the Pershing, which they had not been prepared to face. The underestimation of the Pershing by German tankers also stemmed from a broader misconception held by the German military leadership. Throughout the war, the Germans had been focused on developing ever more powerful and complex tanks, such as the Tiger II, which were seen as the ultimate in tank warfare. This belief in the technological superiority of German tanks led to a mindset where the Germans felt they could defeat any Allied tank with relative ease. The introduction of the Pershing challenged this mindset and revealed a critical weakness in German tank strategy: their overconfidence in their own designs and their failure to anticipate how quickly the Allies could adapt and counter their technological advantages. As the war progressed, German tank crews began to realize their mistake The 90mm gun of the Pershing proved to be a significant threat to the German heavy tanks, capable of destroying Tigers and Panthers from a distance where the German guns could not effectively return fire. This shift in the tactical balance caught many German tank crews off guard, and they were forced to reconsider their approach to tank combat. The arrival of the Pershing, while too late to change the outcome of the war, represented a turning point in armored warfare, showing that technological innovation on the battlefield was not confined to the Germans alone. In summary, the German underestimation of the threat posed by the American Pershing tank was a critical factor in the early success of the new vehicle on the battlefield. Due to the limited number of Pershings deployed, the lack of information about the tank's capabilities, and the prevailing belief in German technological superiority, many German tank crews did not immediately recognize the Pershing as a serious challenge. However, as they encountered it in combat, the German military was forced to reevaluate its strategies and face the reality that the Allies were no longer at a disadvantage when it came to armored warfare. The Pershing's 90mm gun and improved armor made it a formidable opponent, and the Germans' initial underestimation of its capabilities contributed to the difficulties they faced in the final months of the war. The M26 Pershing tank's success on the battlefield was not solely due to its superior design or firepower, but also to the tactical surprise it brought when it appeared. The Allies' strategy of deploying the Pershing in limited numbers and using it sporadically in combat gave it an element of surprise that proved crucial in countering the German tanks, especially the formidable Tiger and Panther models. By the time the Pershing arrived in the European theater, the Germans were entrenched in their belief that their tanks were the undisputed kings of the battlefield. The Pershing's sudden appearance, equipped with a powerful 90mm gun and stronger armor, caught many German tank crews off guard, giving the Allies an unexpected advantage. The element of surprise played a key role in how the Pershing was able to take German tankers by surprise. By its very nature, the Pershing was not initially expected on the battlefield, as it was deployed in limited numbers, often in smaller groups and often accompanied by more common tanks like the M4 Sherman. The Germans, who had grown accustomed to facing the same types of Allied tanks, were not prepared for the appearance of a new tank that could match or exceed the firepower and protection of their own heavy vehicles. Since American tankers were not widely engaged with the Pershing until the final stages of the war, the Germans were not familiar with the specific capabilities and advantages of this new tank. The tactical surprise of the Pershing was compounded by the fact that, unlike the M4 Sherman, it was designed specifically to engage and destroy heavily armored German tanks. The Pershing's 90mm gun, capable of knocking out Tigers and Panthers at long range, made it a game changer when it was introduced. Because of the limited number of Pershings in action, German tank crews did not have the time or opportunity to adapt their tactics to the new threat. This element of surprise was critical in battles, such as those in the Battle of the Bulge and the Rhine crossings, where the Germans were still relying on their traditional tactics of using Tigers and Panthers to break through enemy lines. Additionally, the Pershing was used in conjunction with other Allied forces, which helped disguise its true capabilities. The Germans, who were already facing a significant number of Allied tanks, did not initially recognize that a new, more powerful tank was now part of the mix. The unexpected appearance of the Pershing among the standard M4 Shermans and other Allied vehicles made it difficult for German commanders to effectively respond to the new threat. This led to confusion and a slow reaction time from the Germans, who were forced to adjust on the fly to a tank that was capable of destroying their own heavy armor at longer ranges than they had anticipated. One of the key aspects of the Pershing's tactical surprise was its ability to operate in smaller numbers without attracting too much attention. The limited deployment of the Pershing meant that its appearance was not immediately widespread, which allowed it to act almost like a secret weapon in key engagements. For example, in certain battles, a handful of Pershings could change the outcome of a skirmish by knocking out several German tanks before the Germans could react. The sudden loss of one or two Tigers or Panthers to an unknown American tank with superior firepower had a destabilizing effect on German morale. The shock value of encountering a tank that could match the Germans in their own domain of armored warfare was significant, especially when the Pershing's 90 gun proved so effective against German tanks. Tactical surprise wasn't just about the appearance of the tank itself, but also about how American commanders employed the Pershing. By keeping the tank's presence a secret for as long as possible, the Allies ensured that the Germans would not have time to properly adjust their tactics. Furthermore, because the Pershing was deployed in conjunction with other tanks that were more familiar to the Germans, the Allies were able to disguise the true purpose of the Pershing. German tank crews, assuming they were simply encountering another Sherman, would often be taken by surprise when they suddenly faced a more heavily armed and armored opponent capable of destroying their tanks at range. The surprise effect was also magnified by the fact that the German tankers were often engaged in desperate fighting on multiple fronts. By the time the Pershing was deployed, Germany was already on the defensive, and its tank crews were under constant pressure. They were facing not only the Allies but also a dwindling supply of fuel, parts, and reinforcements. In this strained environment, the appearance of a new and powerful tank like the Pershing, which could destroy German heavy tanks before they could close the distance, was another blow to the morale of the already overstretched German forces. Another aspect of tactical surprise was the way in which the Pershing complemented the other tactics used by the Allies. As the war entered its final stages, the Allies had perfected the art of combined arms warfare, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support worked together in a highly coordinated fashion. The Pershing's powerful gun and strong armor were used in conjunction with airstrikes, artillery barrages, and infantry advances to break through German defenses. This ability to strike with overwhelming force from multiple directions further complicated the Germans' ability to mount an effective defense. The tactical surprise was thus not just the result of the tank's appearance, but also its integration into the broader strategy employed by the Allies. In conclusion, the tactical surprise played a significant role in the effectiveness of the Pershing tank in the final months of World War II. Its limited deployment, combined with its unexpected arrival on the battlefield, caught German tank crews off guard, forcing them to adapt quickly to a new and formidable threat. The Pershing's superior firepower, coupled with its ability to destroy German tanks from a distance, helped to shift the balance of power in armored warfare in favor of the Allies. As a result, the Pershing's impact was felt far beyond its limited numbers, contributing to the eventual collapse of the German military and the Allied victory in Europe. The arrival of the MM-26 Pershing tank in the final months of World War II played a pivotal role in shifting the balance of armored warfare in Europe, even though it was introduced relatively late in the conflict. While the Pershing was not present in large numbers, its advanced capabilities, particularly its 90 gun and improved armor, contributed to an evolving battlefield dynamic that further weakened German resistance. The Pershing was not the only factor in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany, but its presence and the threat it posed to German tanks like the Tiger and Panther marked the beginning of the end for the German army's armored supremacy. Throughout much of the war, German tanks like the Tiger I and Tiger II, along with the Panther, had enjoyed a considerable technological advantage over Allied tanks. The Germans had developed some of the most formidable and heavily armored tanks on the battlefield, and their 88 mm guns were capable of destroying most Allied armor from long distances. In contrast, the American M4 Sherman, while reliable and mass-produced, was relatively underpowered when compared to the German heavy tanks, especially when it came to penetrating their thick armor. The U.S. Army's reliance on the Sherman left them at a significant disadvantage in direct tank-to-tank combat, as the Sherman's 75 mm gun was insufficient to deal with the heavily armored German tanks, particularly at long range. The introduction of the Pershing, with its 90 gun capable of piercing the thick armor of the German Tigers and Panthers, was a game-changer. The 90 gun was capable of taking out German tanks at ranges where their 88 mm guns could not effectively retaliate. This shift in the balance of firepower meant that the once feared German heavy tanks which had dominated armored warfare in Europe, could no longer rely on their superior armor and firepower to guarantee battlefield success. The Pershing's ability to destroy German tanks at long range forced the Germans to rethink their tank engagements and adapt their tactics to face this new, formidable American tank. The presence of the Pershing, though limited in number, had a psychological and tactical effect on German forces. For months, German tank crews had become accustomed to facing the MF-4 Sherman and its relatively weak 75-mounted gun. In their minds, the Shermans were manageable threats, particularly when operating in numbers. However, the appearance of the Pershing created uncertainty among the German ranks. The 90 mm gun mounted on the Pershing could destroy German tanks like the Tiger and Panther, which had previously been regarded as nearly invincible. This created a shift in German tankers' mentalities, forcing them to contend with the realization that their superiority in tank warfare was no longer guaranteed. Furthermore, the appearance of the Pershing altered the tactical choices made by both the American and German forces. The Germans, who had relied on their Tigers and Panthers to provide a heavy punch in their armored divisions, now had to adjust their tactics to account for the new threat posed by the Pershing. The Pershing's high-velocity gun and strong armor made it a dangerous adversary, and German tank crews had to rethink their approach to tank combat, often retreating or avoiding engagement with the Pershing altogether. This tactical shift further weakened the effectiveness of the German armored forces. For the American forces, the Pershing's introduction helped to level the playing field in tank engagements. While the Sherman was still the backbone of the U.S. Army's armored forces, the Pershing provided a much-needed counterbalance to the German heavy tanks. Its superior firepower allowed American tank crews to engage German tanks with greater confidence, knowing that their new vehicle could match or even surpass the German tanks in terms of both offensive and defensive capabilities. The shift in the balance of armored warfare, even with the limited deployment of the Pershing, allowed the Allies to press forward more effectively, reducing the impact of German tanks in the final stages of the war. The Pershing's role in shifting the balance of armored warfare was also linked to the broader strategic context of World War II in Europe. By the time the Pershing was deployed, the Allied forces were already making significant strides on multiple fronts. The Germans were fighting a defensive war on several fronts, facing both the advancing Soviet Red Army from the east and the Allied forces from the west. As the Allies pushed into Germany, the Pershing's presence contributed to the destruction of key German armor and further weakened the Germans' ability to defend themselves. The Pershing was not only effective in direct engagements with German tanks, but also had a strategic impact by demoralizing German forces and hastening their collapse. In addition to its tactical contributions, the Pershing also symbolized the growing technological and industrial capabilities of the Allied forces. By the time the Pershing entered the war, the Allies had outproduced Germany in terms of tank manufacturing. While the Germans focused on building fewer, more technologically advanced tanks, the Allies mass-produced reliable tanks like the Sherman, which provided overwhelming numbers. The Pershing, a reflection of this shift, was not just a technologically superior vehicle, but also an example of the Allies' ability to match and surpass German tank designs. This technological shift was crucial in the final stages of the war, when the Germans were unable to keep up with the Allies in terms of tank development or production. The combination of the Pershing's superior firepower, its ability to destroy German tanks at long ranges, and the psychological impact it had on German tank crews contributed to the shifting balance of armored warfare in Europe. While the Pershing was deployed in limited numbers, its effectiveness in combat and its ability to counter the powerful German tanks made it a critical component in the Allied victory. The Germans, who had once relied on their superior tanks to dominate the battlefield, now had to contend with a new, formidable opponent. This marked the end of the era where the German tanks were the undisputed masters of armored warfare, and the Pershing played a significant role in tipping the scales in favor of the Allies. In conclusion, the presence of the M26 Pershing tank in the final months of World War II significantly shifted the balance of armored warfare in Europe. Despite being introduced late in the conflict, and in limited numbers, the Pershing's 90mm gun and improved armor made it a serious threat to the German heavy tanks, which had once dominated the battlefield. Its introduction forced the German military to adjust their tactics, and its psychological impact contributed to the breakdown of German armored superiority. The Pershing, even with its relatively small numbers, was an important factor in the ultimate defeat of Nazi Germany and the conclusion of the war in Europe.